Let them praises give Jehovah. They were made at his command. Them forever he established. His decree shall ever stand. From the earth, oh, praise Jehovah. All ye floods, ye dragons all. Fire and hail and snow and vapor, stormy winds that hear him call. Let them praises give Jehovah, for his name alone is high. And his glory is exalted. And his glory is exalted. And his glory is exalted, far above the earth and sky.
We are continuing in chapter 8. If you need a handout from last week, I have several here. Be happy to get these to you. If not, we will resume where we left off. So let's do a little background. First of all, you recall that this is the chapter 8 introduces what will be the first 4 trumpets. So what will be 7 trumpets? So here's the first 4 trumpets. And when the 7th trumpet sounds, there will be the beginning of the judgments. It's taken this long for the various seals to be broken. And with each seal, there's been a progression toward the coming judgment. Finally, the 7th seal is broken. And with that 7th seal, the scroll is opened and the judgment begins. And so this is what we see. First of all, we saw also the significance of the trumpets, the purposes of the trumpets. And with the first trumpet sounding, we read in chapter 8, verse 7, the first angel blew his trumpet, and there followed hail and fire mixed with blood, and these were thrown upon the earth. A third of the earth was burned up. A third of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. It's very easy for us to say, well, here, this looks like the end of time. What's going to take place when Jesus comes, and the parousia, and the conclusion of everything, the end time. But we don't have to look far in the distant future from the first century to see the fulfillment of that. We look right at the first century in the eyewitness account of Josephus, and we see those very things happening. And of course that coincides with what Jesus had said in his Mount Olivet discourse in Matthew 24 and also in Luke, that there would be that destruction that would take place in very symbolic terms, horrific terms. And he says, this generation won't pass away till you've seen it happen. And so what we viewed last week was some of the writings of Josephus, and I think we made it down to the bottom of page 4, perhaps. We'll look at that last paragraph just as a reminder. We saw Vespasian's rise to power with the political machinations and the military defeat of Cestius Gallus, who had been sent to defeat the uprising, but he himself and his army had been defeated. So he leaves in humiliation, dies not long after that, and Vespasian is selected to go and ultimately finally put down this insurrection of these Jews, and that's that war that's going on, the uprising and their civil wars and internecine fighting. And so that's where Vespasian is. And we look at that last paragraph on page 4. Assuming command of the Roman forces, Vespasian observed Nero's order to quash the rebellion, and he intensified the military pressure. Josephus includes fire as one weapon of destruction used by Vespasian against the rebels. And this is what Josephus writes. So Vespasian marched to the city of Gadara, took it upon first onset because he found it destitute of any considerable number of men grown up and fit for war. He came then into it and slew all the youth, the Romans having no mercy on any age whatsoever. And this was done out of the hatred they bore the nation, and because of the iniquity they had been guilty of in the affair of Cestius. He also set fire not only to the city itself, but to all the villas and small cities that were round about it. Some of them were quite destitute of inhabitants, and out of some of them he carried the inhabitants as slaves into captivity. And so this is where we ended last week, the attack of Vespasian. We see the hail and the fire, 1/3 of the land, 1/3 of the trees, and all the grass is destroyed. We continue on page 5 now, picking up where we had, just beyond where we left off. According to Josephus, this is Vespasian's strategy. Vespasian, therefore, in order to try how he might overcome the natural strength of the place, as well as the bold defense of the Jews, made a resolution to prosecute the siege with vigor. To that end, he called the commanders that were under him to a council of war, consulted with them which way the assault might be managed to the best advantage. And when the resolution was taken there to raise a bank against that part of the wall which was practicable, and he sent his whole army abroad to get the materials together. So when they had cut down all the trees on the mountains that adjoined the city, here is Vespasian's strategy for attacking Jerusalem. They're going to build embankments. And, of course, they're going to be resisted by the rebels, the Jews that are inside, and they're going to be throwing what are called the darts. Yeah, not so much arrows necessarily as objects that are heavy, metal, have stones in them, and can do regular damage. And so Vespasian is going to have some hurdles brought, as they're called, for protection over them while they're throwing those down on them so they can make that attack and make that siege. He had gotten together a vast heap of stones besides the wood they had cut down. Some had brought hurdles in order to avoid the effects of the darts that were shot from above them. These hurdles they spread over their banks, under cover wherever they formed their bank, so they were little or nothing hurt by the darts that were thrown upon them from the wall, while others pulled the neighboring hillocks to pieces and perpetually brought earth to them, so that while they were busy 3 sorts of ways, nobody was idle. However, the Jews cast great stones to the walls upon the hurdles which protected the men, with all sorts of darts also, and the noise of what could not reach them was yet so terrible that it was some impediment to the workmen. So here are the darts that are being thrown, possibly also arrows. We know arrows were used very early in military fighting and in hunting. You recall that Jehu killed Jehoram by firing the arrow, and it went through pierced through his armor. At a later stage in the siege, Josephus records Titus. After Josephus says that Vespasian, upon Nero's death, suicide, Vespasian goes back to Rome, and he'll eventually be an emperor in what's known as the year of 4 emperors. There's a vying for that political power of the emperorship. And so Titus is left. And regarding Titus, Josephus says, he gave his soldiers leave to set the suburbs on fire, ordered that they should bring timber together and raise banks against the city. And when he had parted his army into 3 parts in order to set about those works, he placed those that shot darts and the archers in the midst of the banks that they were then rising, before whom he placed those engines that threw javelins and darts and stones, that he might prevent the enemy from sallying out upon their works, and might hinder those that were upon the wall from being able to obstruct them. So the trees were now cut down immediately, and the suburbs left naked. When the seditious still showed no inclination of yielding, Titus, out of his commiseration of the people that remained, out of his earnest desire of rescuing what was still left out of these miseries, began to raise his banks again, although all the trees that were about the city had been already cut down for the making of the former banks. So they cut down all the trees that were in the country that adjoined the city, and that for 90 furlongs round about, as I have already related, and truly the very view itself of the country was a melancholy thing, for those places which were before adorned with trees and pleasant gardens were now become a desolate country every way, and its trees were all cut down. Nor could any foreigner that had formerly seen Judea and the most beautiful suburbs of the city, and now saw it as a desert, but lament and mourn sadly at so great a change. For the war had laid all the signs of beauty quite waste, nor if anyone that had known the place before had come on it sudden to now would he had known it again. So Josephus witnessed all this, and he sees what the trumpet blast had forewarned. So we see he quotes that Titus as saying Vespasian burned Galilee and the surrounding areas. So there was the fire that Vespasian saw was a very beneficial weapon to use in trying to restrain these rebels. So we get back to chapter 8, verse 7, the C part. With the first trumpet blast, a third of the earth. And we've seen that the Greek word gay is translated by most translators as earth, but much of that may have to do with their own predilection toward in time, rather than seeing it as something that was being accomplished in the first century. Because land actually is an accurate rendering. That is, it is the land, in this case the land of Palestine. Seeing a third of the land was burned up, and a third of the trees were burned up, and all green grass was burned up. And when the Roman army set fire to the cities, fields, and crops, there was a resulting famine. And that famine then results in starvation, disease, and ultimately death within the walls of Jerusalem during what would be a 5-month siege. So the food is cut off, the communication is cut off, the Roman armies are just waiting there. They're not attacking yet. They have sealed off the city, but they are burning everything around it. The Romans, by destroying what the city had laid up against the siege, and by thus cutting off the nerves of their own power, accordingly it so came to pass that all the places that were about the temple were burnt down, and will become an intermediate desert space, ready for fighting on both sides of it, and that almost all the corn was burnt, which would have been sufficient for a siege of many years. So they were taken by means of the famine. Here's some extra. Yeah, here's the one. We have a few extra handouts here for you, if you like those. We're in chapter 8, and we're on page 6, the bottom of page 6. So there is no need for us to, and certainly no purpose, in looking to the distant future for a fulfillment of what this trumpet blast forecast. We can see the accomplishment of it right there in 70 AD.
So Charles, you know
Yes.
that there are those who believe it is Testament.
Absolutely, yes. And that depends on how we view Revelation. If we view it as something that's yet to be fulfilled, then that's how we're going to interpret
They're
that.
not aware of this all happened, or they use the events that are happening today as events that are predicted here.
Yeah, and that's very convenient. Each generation tends to have its own application. We can look for 100, 150 years as we view what people have written, say, well, this has been fulfilled now, but time's passed, and they say, well, this is being fulfilled now. Then we get today, it's being fulfilled now. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. Jerry?
I think one of the best arguments against this referring to the future or even to now into the future is the fact we keep having to reinvent what it applies to.
Yeah.
As history moves on,
Yeah.
we keep reinventing it. The principles.
But I can't, my thing is, I can't reconcile the last half of Revelation, which is most definitely in the future, with where, there's no point in the book where you can tell that it switches. It's
Yeah, I see what you're saying, Sam, and I agree with you. The last part, very definitely, where we see Satan being ultimately defeated, and the redeemed entering into heaven, the adorned bride of Christ. So there's definitely a future. But we have to be careful of trying to interpret Revelation in a chronological sense. It's not, it's a vision. It's not revelations that Jesus gives John. It's the revelation. It's a picture. And in that picture are many scenes. And they understood it in the first century. Unfortunately, we don't have access to their knowledge of the first century and their understanding of those symbols and emblems. But to be consistent with what John was saying, it seems like we have to take into account his words, that the time is near, that it must soon take place. And that's repeated several times. And plus when we can see it actually happening in 70 AD, and we harmonize that with Jesus saying this will take place in the generation of his persecutors. And in fact, even telling Caiaphas and the council, you will see the Son of Man coming in his glory. And so that generation beheld all that was taking place and suffered greatly for it, for their rejection of God, ultimately their alignment with the beast, Rome, that was a tool of Satan to quash the church, to persecute and execute, take to prison and put to death Christians, to try to stamp out this religion. And that's what was going on. We see Paul subject to that. He'll be executed by Nero. Peter probably also in Rome, executed, a martyr. So we see the blood of the martyrs taking place, and God, when he's executing judgment, is pronouncing his divorce from Israel. There'll be a new bride. Israel has been unfaithful. She has played the harlot. She is more united with Rome, and especially her religious leaders. They are put in place by Rome, and they kowtow to Rome in order to have the favor and keep that power. And part of that power was to keep these Jews in line. And we've got this new religion going on that won't even worship Nero. They need to be put down too. So, if we could understand it easily, we probably wouldn't have a need for such a class as Revelation. But because there are so many different ways of viewing it, there's what I believe is the most consistent, the preterist view, that it took place in the first century. And not just in the first century, in the first half of the first century, about 70 AD, everything seems to fit with the destruction of Jerusalem and the fall of the temple and the quashing of the Jewish system, Judaism. That seems to fit what Jesus was saying would take place. But there are those who say, no, it's not talking about historical facts, it's a philosophy. That's all that we're talking about. This the teachings of God that can be seen through that, the punishment of evil ultimately. And others see it as a dispensational, from the very beginning of time to the end of time. And others see it as simply the church age that'll be culminating in a 1,000-year reign. So there's many different ways of viewing it, and how we see those symbols depends upon how we view Revelation. Our purpose in our study here, as I've emphasized, is to not be dogmatic and say it's this way and only this way, but to say this seems to make more sense and is more reasonable to interpret this way. Mike?
Yeah, one thing everybody tends to forget is that at the end of time, Judgment Day, and it says in the Bible that Jesus will come as a thief in the night. Mm-hmm. That means there's not going to be any signs of him coming.
Yeah.
It's just going to suddenly happen.
Yeah.
There's not going to be a signs built up to it.
Yeah.
He's going to come and sleep by night.
Yeah. It'd be convenient if the robber would warn you ahead of time that he's going to break in.
We're not going to have any signs. It's just like if you live at home. You know, the thieves all of a sudden start knocking on the windows, and that would signs of them.
It'd be convenient,
Good
point.
Come in, you say, "Oh, that sign's a thief. You're going to come in." I better get out. There's no signs. I mean, it's just boom.
Yeah.
You know, the thief comes in.
And yet, don't we hear so consistently? We see the signs being fulfilled. The signs are being fulfilled.
You know, if somebody came and told me, okay, in the next few years, this is going to happen, and it's going to be just awful. And they all did happen, exactly as the person told me. And then they said, but one day, you know, this in the future is going to happen. So that's the hope you can hold on to, and the fact that these things did happen, and they happened in my lifetime, and I saw them happen, would give me extra confidence that what they then said about, you know, the future. So that to me is the reason to have the today, you know, or the early on, and then to look at when Christ does return and the ultimate end, because the first part is true. It gives us confidence that the second part is true.
Good point. Excellent. And we know that many of the Jewish Christians at that time believed those prophecies, and they fled. They made their way, many to Pella, as Josephus will record. I mean, he's not a Christian, but he's writing what he observed. And so, many did believe and escaped because of that warning that they'd been given.
Well, who are these two witnesses that are dead and everybody sees them and then they come back alive? What's that about?
We're going to look at that. That's a very interesting chapter, very interesting portion there. And when we get to it, I think we'll see what John is referring to. There, I would be careful about us thinking that's any individual, any one individual, any two individuals. That there is a symbolism that's there, and we know Revelation is replete with symbols. So our challenge is interpreting those symbols consistently with the rest of Revelation, but also consistent with the rest of the New Testament. To not come up with any doctrine that's going to contradict non-symbolic, literal teachings of the New Testament. So everything, just a part of proper hermeneutics, as we call it, is to interpret difficult passages by the simple passages, not come up with a contradictory message with that. So that's a huge challenge for us as students of the Bible, isn't it? So let's look at the top of page 7. Ultimately, Josephus writes, the entire city of Jerusalem, including the temple, were consumed by fire. As soon as the army had no more people to slay or to plunder, because there remained none to be the objects of their fury, and this is after the siege is ended and the Roman army is now in the city. They've reached the walls and the slaughter has begun. Because there remained none to their objects to fury, for they would not have spared any had there remained any other work to be done. Caesar gave orders that they should now demolish the entire city and temple, but should leave as many of the towers standing as were the greatest eminency, that is, Thessalus and Ephesus and Mariamne, and so much of the wall as enclosed the city on the west side. This wall was spared in order to afford a camp for such as were to lie in garrison, as were the towers also spared in order to demonstrate to posterity what kind of city it was and how well fortified, which the Roman valor had subdued. But for all the rest of the wall, it was so thoroughly laid even with the ground by those that dug it up to the foundation, that there was left nothing to make those that came thither believe had it ever been inhabited. This was the end which Jerusalem came to, by the madness of those that were for innovations, meaning those rebels and those that were not following after God's teachings, a city otherwise of great magnificence and of mighty fame among all mankind. Now there's an interesting note that Josephus gives. I put it in bold here, in the middle of page 7, that in keeping with God's purposes, the second temple, that's the one burned by the Romans, was burned on the same day of the month that the first temple, Solomon's temple, was burned by the Babylonians. Bit of irony, or God's plan. Josephus writes, as for that house, God had for certain long ago doomed it to the fire. And now that fatal day was come, according to the revolution of ages, it was the 10th day of the month Lus, or Ab in the Hebrew, in AD 70, upon which it was formerly burnt by the king of Babylon. So there is the irony. The city of Jerusalem was burned by Babylon, and the New Testament, John is going to call Jerusalem Babylon, and it will be destroyed by Rome. So there is the fulfillment. And Josephus says this was according to God's purpose. He was a Jew, not a Christian, but he certainly understood the Old Testament, and he knew historically what had taken place. And so that's the first trumpet, the burning of vegetation. And we see that that's what the army did. They cut down all the wood, burned it, and set fire to the whole territory so that there be nothing remaining for the Jews. They would need to surrender and also perish. But now we come to the second trumpet. The seas. This one I would say reminds us of the first Egyptian plague. And we'll see why. The second angel blew his trumpet, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea. A third of the sea became blood. A third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. So here is a second blast of the trumpet, and it reminds us of the plague on Egypt where the Nile River and the other water sources were turned into blood, and the fish died. Not just limited to Nile, but beyond the Nile. Exodus chapter 7, 17 through 21 tells us that all rivers, canals, ponds, and pools of water became blood. There's blood throughout all the land of Egypt. So when John writes here in Revelation, this second trumpet blast, and the waters turn to blood, then it looks like he's repeating what we saw in Exodus with that miracle. And he says on top of page 8, the vision was something like a great fiery mountain thrown in the sea. That's a reminder that God called Israel his holy mountain. When he crossed the Red Sea, the people sang a song of praise to the Lord for his deliverance and for his promise. And it's recorded in Acts 15:17. You will bring them in and plant them on your own mountain, the place, O Lord, which you have made for your abode, the sanctuary, O Lord, which your hands have established. Mountain in the Old Testament was frequently used to denote a kingdom, a powerful kingdom, a recognizable kingdom, because a mountain is very visible, it's high. And so a kingdom that's powerful is recognizable, it's high, it's mighty. Here is a mountain that's cast into the sea. It's going to be destroyed. The mountain will be Israel, specifically Jerusalem.
Incidentally,
yes.
Refer to Mount Zion. If we say that today, that's a symbolic mountain, isn't it? I mean, I had a friend that brought me a rock from the area that was where the temple was, and he said, well, this is from Mount Zion. Well, it's not.
That those terms, though, were very common. You have Mount Zion, Mount Moriah, Mount Calvary, that really more hills there. But the idea is here is a mountain that John says is thrown into the sea. Now, some commentators take that term to refer to Mount Moriah. But it seems best in our study to interpret the mountain as meaning that entire hill country of Palestine. In fact, that Hebrew word, Bahar, is variously translated by the English words mountain, hill country. So here is the great mountain burning with fire thrown into the sea. And I would suggest that is Israel, specifically Jerusalem, destroyed completely, set afire by Vespasian, and desecrated. Not literally thrown into the sea, but symbolically destroyed. dead.
Charles,
Yes.
sorry, I'm going back one
Okay.
over here.
Okay.
I didn't find my scripture I wanted to read.
Okay.
Is this the same destruction of Jerusalem that Jesus was talking about when he taught in his sermon in Mark, when he was preaching about it, when he said, let me read two verses. As Jesus was leaving the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what massive stones, what magnificent buildings." And Jesus said, "Do you see all these great buildings? Not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down."
Yeah. The same discourse, same thing. Matthew records it.
Yeah.
Luke records it. Mark records it. So it was a significant forewarning that Jesus said, this beautiful temple, and look how beautiful these stones are. And Jesus says, I tell you, time's coming when not one stone will be left upon another. And this generation will see it happen. The end was coming. So yes, that's what's happening here with the destruction that's coming. Yeah, in my opinion. In Jeremiah's day, Zion was God's holy mountain, as in the NIV translates it. Yet the Lord's holy mountain, supposed to be holy, has become unrighteous and is condemned by God for her unfaithfulness. And because of that, Jeremiah would lament back in Lamentations 5:18, because of her disloyalty, the Mount of Zion was now a desolate place, fit only for wild beasts. Well, that took place when Babylon destroyed it, and now it's going to be repeated, because Israel did not learn its lesson. The whole history, when you read through the Old Testament, from the time of God calling them out and establishing as a nation, to be a holy nation, to keep His commandments, were continually playing the harlot. And when they got into the land that God promised them, gave them, delivered to them, they were not faithful to God for very long. They're continually leaving Him. And then He sends His prophets, and Jesus says, You've killed the prophets. Stephen said, you stoned the prophets and you killed the Holy One. So God's patience and long-suffering has come to an end. He will now divorce His unfaithful wife, Israel. Put her away because of her harlotry. And there will be a new bride, a chaste bride, a pure bride, a holy bride, a righteous bride, His church, that will follow Him, that will obey Him, that will be faithful to Him, and be recipients of His protection and care because of that. Babylon, that was used in the Old Testament as God's instrument to punish the unfaithfulness, that Old Testament metaphor is applied to Babylon, the mountain and the sea. And then in chapter 8 we see it repeated. Then when we get to chapters 14 and 18, those terms are going to be repeated again. Babylon. And it's not the old city that John is referring to. It is Jerusalem. Jerusalem has become the evil, wicked, corrupt city of Babylon. They're part of the Babylonian Empire. And it is the new Babylon. It's a part of the Roman Empire. So because of Israel's infidelity, her rejection of God's servants, her prophets, God's prophets, her murder of God's Son, Jerusalem will be doomed to destruction, just as was ancient Babylon. And we see that in the coming chapter of Revelation 18. Jerusalem is the Babylon of Revelation. And that becomes very clear. We don't have to guess or surmise, because we see in Revelation 18:24, in her was found the blood of prophets and saints and all who have been slain on earth. We don't have to look very far to see who were the ones slaying the prophets. As evil as Babylon was, and Rome, they weren't guilty of slaying prophets and saints. Jerusalem was. Judea was.
Is this around the same time as, the Jews with the oil in the lamp that lasted for 8 days or whatever?
No, that's the intertestamental time. That was the Maccabees.
Oh, I thought they were under siege then.
Well, they were. Had a different siege.
Oh.
They were under siege
Multiple
for a lot of time.
Oh, okay.
They deserved it.
But it happened earlier with that, yes, in the intertestament period, before the New Testament.
Judas Maccabeus was
With the Maccabees.
the prophet that had to do with that.
So Jerusalem was guilty of slaying the prophets and the saints, whereas the ancient literal Babylon nor Rome prior to the Jewish war, they weren't guilty of slaying the prophets and the saints. Then we get to the third trumpet. The waters of the earth struck. The third angel blew his trumpet. A great star fell from heaven, blazing like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers, on springs of water. The name of the star is wormwood. A third of the waters became wormwood, and many people died from the water because it had been made bitter. So here with this vision, the great star falls. Are we through with our time? Getting close. Okay, this would probably be a good place for us to pause then. Right at the top of page 9 with that third trumpet. And so I'll make a mark for that. Begin with that, Lord willing, next week. There is an excursus that I will include. You see that in the middle of page 9, about 3/4 down, about the Roman and Jewish alliance that was going on. That gives an additional historical perspective of the political machinations that the high priests were involved with at that time. So that'll be another handout. We can have that next week as we continue our study here in chapter 8. So it's taken a while to go through it. But again, it's not a book that's written chronologically. It's written as a vision, a revelation, a picture, a snapshot, and within it are various scenes that John recognizes and says, then I saw this, then I saw this. Pardon me?
They call it fragmented.
Yeah, good term. Okay. All right, any closing thoughts this morning as we wrap up our study of this portion of chapter 8?
I wish there was a graph, and you see Adam and Eve, right along on the stock market, like, they're doing good. And then it falls off. And then we're back up, and then, around Noah's time, it is really, it's time.
Yeah.
And all through the scripture, we're doing Nehemiah, a ladies class. And they come back and they've got a job and it's going well, except. And it's full with all this exceptions. They keep, it's going all right, so now I'm going to go do what I want. I would perceive that we did a graph like that. 90% of it would be down in the, losing money part,
The excellent metaphor of the graph there. The message of Revelation to Christians is, though, be patient. God is in control. Satan is defeated. You may suffer for your faith, but you will be rewarded in heaven. And so that's the same message that's true in every day and time. Because there's still conflicts today, challenges to our faith, persecutions, temptations. And so that message is perennial. Be faithful. Be patient. Be true to God. Follow Jesus, and you will have your reward. So that's the ultimate message of Revelation, final message. So, okay, thank you everyone for your presence, for your participation.
Just a closer walk with thee, just a closer walk with thee.
Just a closer walk with thee.
Just a closer walk with thee.
Granted, Jesus, if you please. Daily walking close to thee. Let it be, dear Lord. Let it be,
dear Lord, let it be. Let it be, dear Lord, through this world of toil and
this
snares,
world of toil and snares. If I falter, Lord, who cares?
If I falter, Lord, who cares? Who with me my burden shares?
With me my burden shares.
Who with me my burden
None but thee, dear Lord. None but thee,
oh Lord, none but thee. None but thee, dear Lord.
I am weak, but thou art strong. Jesus, keep me from all wrong.
Jesus, keep me from all wrong.
I'll be satisfied as long.
I'll be satisfied as long.
As I walk,
Just let me
dear
walk,
Lord,
as I walk, just
close to
as I walk so
thee.
close to thee. Close to thee, dear Lord.
When my feeble life is over, time for me will be no more.
Time for me will be no more.
Guide me gently, safely, oh, to thy kingdom shore, to thy shore. Let it be, dear Lord. Let it be.
After all the things we've been through, I still have joy.